Good evening, everybody. Okay.
Good evening.
Briefly, before I just start, it's I need to say it offset that God's word is, it is truly a gift, and there is, I think, the greatest gift for me after Jesus. It is God's word, which is really a huge gift, and I think there is so much to learn from it and so much to get a hold of. I'm going to start off as an introduction to the whole idea of the Ten Commandments today. Okay, what is this? There's a lot of we have our own ideas about the Ten Commandments, obviously, because that's how we have grown up or we have heard about it, and that's how we perceive it. But what does the scripture really say or mean by this? Is it something different? Um, to start with, please understand that in a pagan world, when the Bible was, God was working in among God's people, it was a pagan world, and they had kings that ruled nations. Okay, so always it is the king who would give them laws and decrees. Okay, kings would give that. Kings would give law and decrees, and the people follow. Basically, that's how it worked. Um, but for the first time in history, okay, God Himself gives law. This has not happened before, historically, okay, and this is first time when God Himself is giving instructions. Is usually kings who give instruction and the subjects follow, and they have the gods who they worship in the temples. But for the first time, God is intervening and giving instructions Himself personally. Okay, now that's one aspect. The other thing we got to understand biblically, from the times beginning, we have God making covenant with God with these people. You understand covenant, right? God making covenant, and it really started with Abraham, as we know the story when Abraham was put to sleep. Remember that story? And God asked him to cut animals into two pieces, and he had to walk through those animals. This is an old custom where a greater would have a covenant with a lesser. And the goal in that practice was that they would walk through it, through the blood. They would shake their hands dipped in blood, and they would say, if one of us violates the covenant, may it be what is done to the animals be done to us. That is what the practice was. So they would actually walk through these animals, cut into two halves, and they would make a covenant, saying that if you violate the covenant, may what has been done to the animals be done to us. But in the story of Abraham in Genesis 15, we find that Abraham didn't walk. God walked. Remember the pot of fire that came in a vision and it went through it, and Abraham was sleeping. And God walked that aisle of blood. Abraham did not. And it's incredible because God's message there was, I know at some point you will violate it and you will not be able to find a way back. And so God walked it. And incredibly, Jesus fulfills the covenant through his death because he butchered himself. What God is saying, you will violate the covenant, but instead of you getting butchered and slain like these animals, I will slay myself and keep the covenant. So the covenant that God met with Abraham was fulfilled in Jesus. And Paul talks about that in the book of Galatians and various other places. In Romans, he talks about that covenant of Abraham and how we are grafted into that covenant of what God did. What's magnificent in that story is that God walked and Abraham did not. That was an act of grace God displayed, that you will violate and you will never be able to find your way back, but I will slay myself and love you. So God started this whole covenant. I want you to get the picture what's happening here biblically. And so God started this journey of covenant with God's people. God is the one who initiated it, knowing fully that man would violate it. Now, the word command, okay, we say the 10 commandments, right? Okay, in the Hebrew, we got to understand what it all means. The word for command used is mitzvah. Mitzvah. Now, mitzvah does not mean command. Mitzvah means ruling. like a judge makes a ruling for a legal issue. It's like a passing of a ruling. Okay, it's not command in the literal sense. Mitzvah doesn't mean that. Now, in fact, the Hebrew word used for Ten Commandments in the original text, I've been studying Hebrew in my last semester, and I came across this and really fascinated me. And it reads Aseret ha davarim. That is the Hebrew word for Ten Commandments. Aseret means 10, ha davarim, the words. The 10 words is what originally it means. It does not mean the 10 commandments. They literally mean the 10 words. In other words, it is actually known as the Decalogue, not the 10 commandments, but the Decalogue, the 10 words. So why is this important? Why is it important from understanding it as 10 commandments versus understanding it as 10 words? Massive difference. Okay? Why? Because when we say the 10 words, what we are saying is these are statements of facts that God is making. These are principles God is stating up against commands that he's giving. If you don't do this, if you don't do that. What he is stating is, if you don't live like this, this is what would happen. And these are the consequences of it. So 10 words, in other words, are statements of facts. God is stating certain realities. He's giving certain principles down there. So it's very different from, oh, am I obeying this, or am I understanding the principle behind this? Okay, what was the principle behind the Sabbath? What is the principle behind not to murder? What is the principle behind honor your father and mother? Is it just a statement, or is there a principle behind it? That is exactly the heart of the 10 commandments, which we say 10 commandments. From here on, we should say 10 words. Okay, the 10 words, because these are 10, that's the original meaning in the Hebrew, Hasarat Hadavarim. And it really means that God is making statements of facts. Okay, so that is the first element that we need to first highlight. What happened was in the early years, especially when the church was established and Roman Catholic Church, and during the centuries, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish mindset. So a lot of the Jewish practices and beliefs were slowly, diluted in the translations. Okay, because they did not want, the Gentile church did not want any association with the Jewish church. There's a lot of politics that went on. And so during that process, a lot of the words and meanings lost its essence. Anything associated with the Jew or God of Israel, they would struggle to translate it. They would struggle to put it in paper. Okay, and there was an issue. Okay, we don't want to get into that now, because just keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why it became commandments versus words, which originally what it meant. So let's just go to the text now. Exodus 20 is where 10 commandments is based. But what we'll do is we'll look at Exodus 19 before we get to 20 and sort of set the base and see why and how God gave all this and what is the real picture behind all this. So let's go straight into Exodus 19. Okay, read with me in chapter 19. This is very fascinating. And let's read in chapter 19. Let's read from, you can read the chapter later, but let's just, for sake of time, read verse 4, and then we'll capture some points there. Verse 4 in Exodus 19. It reads this. You yourself, now God is speaking, okay? You yourself have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Okay, that is very important to pick first. Now, what is God stating here? God is reminding them how he brought his people out of Egypt, out of slavery, into the promised land. And God is giving them the picture and reminding them and saying, remember that I brought you out where? He does not say the promised land. Notice what he's saying. I brought you to myself. Very critical statement to understand. God is not saying I brought you to heaven and I brought you to a better place. You know what God is stating there? He's saying the entire journey from Egypt through and all those drama that happened was only to bring you to myself. Wow, that is an intimate statement. We miss that, right? We kind of look at the promised land, but God behind the scene is really talking about, I want you to come to me. And so he brings out of to himself. That's the first statement that's important. The second statement there is, like how I carried you on eagle's wings. That's a very important statement as well, because the eagles of that time, even today in the Palestinian world, okay, would stay at very top of the mountains, and at a certain point when the eaglets are ready, the eagle will push it out of its nest, okay, and force it to fly. And as it drops and is really about to fall, touch the ground, the eagle will come below and swoop it. And the eaglet will hold on to the back of the eagle, of the wings, and stick to the mother, and the eagle will fly back on top. That's the picture God is giving. It's like, just when you're about to fall, as a nation, I came and picked you up and swooped you like an eagle and protected you. Remember, and he's reminding them, and he's, provoking sentiments in the hearts of God's people. Now, all of this is happening before the 10 Commandments are given to Moses. It has not been given yet, or the 10 words, okay, have not been yet given to Moses yet, okay. Now in verse 5 he says, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, here's that word again, covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. And then goes on to say, although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Who do you think quoted that statement? Kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Peter. In 1 Peter, he quotes that. This is where he picks it from. This is where he gets the idea from. Okay, that ultimately we are to become a holy nation, a royal nation of priesthood. Okay, but the word to be quoted here mainly to understood here is the fact that he's saying that you will fully obey me and keep my covenant, that out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Now in the Hebrew, this word is critical, because the moment a Jew or any God's people of later times hears the word treasured possession, it is a word or a statement related to marriage. It is related to marriage. Okay? Now, there is a picture of marriage that God is going to paint before he gives the 10 Commandments. This entire story is going to be a covenant picture of God marrying his people. Okay? Be with me, please. What is happening? Treasured possession is a critical word here. All the rabbis in the Jewish culture teach that this language was when a groom calls his bride on the wedding day. The groom will call his bride, you are my treasured possession, is what the groom would tell the bride on the wedding day. And the Hebrew word used there is exactly the same. In that same language, where God is saying, you are my treasured possession, almost as if God is calling his people, his bride, and saying that I'm calling you into a married relationship, a covenant, an unbreakable covenant. Once for all, you are going to be my bride. That picture is what is going on here. We will miss it if we just read it in English and say treasured possession and move on, but in the real text, it just stands out. And people would stop and think, whoa, what is God saying there? What does he mean by that? So what's the picture now? The rest of the picture that follows, up until the 10 words is given, is this entire arranged marriage, okay, that is going to happen between God and his people. This is a marriage God is going to perform with his people. How does it work? How does it work? Let's just get that. There are a few steps in a Jewish marriage or in a wedding. Okay, the first is the betrothal. Okay, you would go and approach the girl and ask her hand. We'll get to the details later. After that happens, the groom leaves. If the girl says yes, the boy comes to ask the girl's hand. If the girl says yes, the groom leaves and goes back to prepare the house. Okay, and waits for the wedding day to happen. The third thing that happens is once the wedding day is ready, the arrival of the bridegroom, okay, and then the bride is consecrated. And after the bride is consecrated, the shofar, the trumpet is blown, is blown and is announced, okay, and then they are gathered. The couple is gathered under a tent. It's called the chuppah or the kuppah in the Hebrew, okay. They would gather under the tent. After they are gathered under the tent, they would present each other the ketubah. The ketubah, that is they're taking the vows. They'll take the vows with each other, make the promises to each other. Okay, and then the marriage will happen. Okay, and then marriage gifts will be exchanged, and then the honeymoon. That's how the whole ceremonies function. Now, historically, how the Jewish people viewed God working in history was exactly the same way. They first saw themselves as God's, bride. And so how did that all work? It all started with the engagement covenant that happened with Abraham. Okay, that's how it started. So Abraham leaves his house and follows God. And that's where the covenant began, when the animals were cut and God and Abraham made the covenant. So in the Jewish mind, it all starts there. Okay, so that's a story where God makes the arrangement in the covenant, the cup of the covenant. How does it happen? The guy goes to the girl's house. He has a cup in his hand. He'll pour wine into it, and he'll ask the girl whether he'll accept her to be, or accept the drink. If the girl knocks the small cup down, that means it's no. And if she drinks it, yeah, you're ready. Okay, so that's how the betrothal would happen. Okay, they would go and he would propose, and this is what the guy will say, the groom will say. He will say, this is the cup of the new covenant, and I'll make with you today. I will not drink of this cup again until I will drink it with you in my Father's house. This is what he will say. He will tell her, this is the cup of the new covenant that I'll make with you today. I will not drink of this cup again until I will drink it with you in my Father's house. That's the statement he will make. If the girl accepts it, great. She drinks from the cup means, yes, she's ready to get into a covenant. Okay, that's the first step, the betrothal. The second, the groom leaves to prepare the house. How did the Jews picture this? After Abraham's covenant was made, God's people were led into Egypt. So they saw their time in Egypt as a time when the groom left the to-be bride and went back to the father's house. Okay? So follow me, what's going on here. So he goes back. What does he do? In that culture, the guy would go back to the father's house. Okay? And in the father's house, he would wait. Okay? So he's supposed to go back and help build his father's house. Okay? He's supposed to go back and continue this work, which is part of the work that he has to do, is to help build his father's dwelling or profession, okay, for that matter. Now what will happen is he will build an extra room in which eventually he will stay with his bride. Okay, father will enable him to build an extra room in his house, in the father's house. Okay, so he would go back and build that house as well as that room, preparing for the future bride to come and live with him. Okay, now the third thing that will happen here is that he'll prepare this room. You remember, this room that he's preparing for him and his bride to stay, his father should approve. So his father will once in a while come and check how the room is being built. And he will look at it and say, well, it's okay. It's not to my satisfaction. If the father said it's not to the satisfaction, he has to work harder and make the room better. Till the father says, okay, I think it's good enough. Okay, this is what Jesus means when he says, I'm going to my father's house to prepare a place for you. You understand? No one knows the time, but only the father. What he means by that is, just like in this culture, they would go back until the father approves of the time. When he'll go back to take the bride, he had to continue building the house. And so Jesus alludes to that culture, and he's kind of making a point that, I'm going to my father's house and preparing a room for you, just like is happening here. Okay, it's just beautiful. The Bible is all so connected here and there. Okay, and we sometimes miss it because we don't get the culture or the setup in which it is written. And then what happens? Now the father finally says, yes, ready. Room looks good. Okay, so now it's time to get the bride. Bridegroom will come. Okay, so the bridegroom arrives. Once all is ready, everything is set, the bridegroom arrives. Now, how does the Jew look at the bridegroom arriving? It's a story of the Passover. Remember the Passover? And the angel passed over Israel. And it's basically for them, God intervened in a time when they were lost, and God came into the picture like a bridegroom and rescued them out of Egypt. Okay, so they would look at the arrival of the bridegroom as a story of the Passover. Okay, so when the bridegroom arrives, okay, there will be this is where the part begins. Okay, when the groom shows up. Okay, now read with me verse 10 in chapter 19. Verse 10 says, and the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them. Today and tomorrow, have them wash their clothes. Now, there's a consecration ceremony that goes on here. So, after the arrival of the bridegroom, okay, when the room is ready, okay, what happens is, the bridegroom leaves his house, goes to the bride, okay, arrives at the bride's place, and they show up, okay. The bride is not told in advance. He will just land up. But the bride needs to be ready always, anytime, to be ready for the bridegroom to arrive. She's supposed to be ready anytime, okay. And so when he shows up, the part begins. Immediately when the bridegroom shows up, the bride is supposed to consecrate herself. Okay? He's supposed to have a ritual bath. She's supposed to be cleansed. Exactly what is happening here in chapter 19, verse 10, when the Lord says to Moses, tells the people, go and consecrate. So there's a picture of the marriage building up already. Just like the bride needs to consecrate, Moses tells his people, you go and consecrate. And immediately after the consecration, after the cleansing, after the ritualistic bath that is done, the shofar is blown. The trumpet is blown. Look at verse 20. In fact, verse 16, sorry. Verse 16, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Guess what happened? The trumpet blew. Okay, exactly after the consecration, the trumpet is blown. A sign. These all are signs that God is getting into a covenant relationship with his people, very intimate relationship with his people. Okay, that is what is happening. And the trumpet is exactly like how it would happen in a marriage. The bride will be consecrated, and immediately after the consecration, the trumpet will blow. Now, after the trumpet is blown, remember what happens? They will gather under the chuppah, under the tent. What is happening here in this verse, in verse 16? What covered them? The cloud covered them. And they viewed it as God putting this tent over them, covering like a canopy, which means the presence of God. So under the presence of God, they would make their vows. Okay, now they're going to take their vows. Now, what is the vows? Okay, they called it the ketubah. What is the ketubah? The groom, okay, he would write 7 or maximum 12 items on his list, which to him is a foundation of the relationship, their relationship. And he would say, this is important to me, and this is what I'm looking forward to. This is what I look forward as a couple. And he would have 7 to 12 items on that list. And he would share that as a covenant-making promise with his bride. So the bridegroom would share that. So that's called the ketubah. He makes promise. He makes a covenant. Now, in this case, when the trumpet blew, okay, and they stood under the chuppah, and when the marriage relationship is consummated, okay, what is happening? Moses is taken to the mountain, and God gives his ketubah. What are they? The 10 words. He writes it on tablets and gives it to Moses. It is like God saying, this is my covenant with you. These are the promises. These are the principles I want to share with you and have a relationship with my people. So he makes his ketubah, his marriage relationship, and looking forward for a covenant forever with his people. So right after the shofar is blown, he's taken to the mountaintop, and the ketubah is done. And Moses receives the 10 words from God written on stone, okay, as a declaration that this is the covenant between us forever. Amazing. Okay, and now after this ketubah is done, the marriage is consummated. This is pictured as when the man and woman come together. This is pictured as the tabernacle, the special room where God's relation with his people is set. Where in the tabernacle, God would come and meet his people for the times to come. Okay? So this was pictured as the special room in which the man and woman would become one, was the consummation of the wedding. And then the wedding gifts would be exchanged. What was the wedding gift exchanged? Moses came down from the mountain and gave the law to his people. That was like him, God gifting the law to his people, the guidelines to his people, the principles to his people. Okay? And then sets off the honeymoon time. What is the honeymoon time? According to the Jewish time, the time of wandering in the wilderness. All the years of wandering in the wilderness was considered as honeymoon. Because for 1 year, okay, the bridegroom will not engage in any community responsibilities. He will completely associate himself with the girl. This is according to Deuteronomy chapter 24. That is a condition that after you marry, a year is dedicated to the wife. You don't know, no community involvement. You're only going to be with your wife. In fact, the picture of honeymoon is painted in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 2. I'm going to read this to you. Listen to this. Jeremiah 2 verse 2 says, I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness, through a land not sown. What is God saying? I remember your devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness. So God pictured the entire wilderness time as a honeymoon time, time of knowing each other, time of learning, time of understanding, time of listening, time of making mistakes, time of connecting. All those things happened in the wilderness. So the entire picture of the slavery to the coming to the mountain, taking the covenant, God gave, all this is pictured almost as a wedding relationship under the canopy of the picture of a covenant relationship. That is why it's very critical to understand what does these words actually mean. Now, according to us, which is the first commandment? Now, let's not say commandment, let's say words. Which is the first one? Can anyone share? Which is the first, according to our understanding?
Yeah.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart.
Yeah, but on this list, I mean, specifically.
On this list.
Yeah.
I am the Lord your God
Yeah.
who brought you out of Egypt.
Exactly. Now, what happened because of the anti-Jewish mindset? Okay, this does not list as a first in many Bibles. What lists as a first is you shall not have any other gods before me, and you shall not make any idol. That's the second. The first one would be you shall not have any gods. I am the Lord your God is not considered as one of the words. But in fact, the reality is the first word is I am the Lord your God, and the second and the third is combined. That is, you shall have no other gods and you shall not make any idol. That's one command, one word. Okay, so the first would be I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of slavery. In other words, this is the premise, or this is the foundation of everything I'm about to say. Because I am the God who brought it. Understand this, God did not give his commands or his words or instructions before they left Egypt. Isn't it interesting? He did not give them the commands and say, here are my commands, here are my expectations from you, here are my principles. If you're willing to obey, I'll take you out of Egypt and take you to the promised land. He didn't do that. He gave them no law, no instruction. He in fact rescued them, brought them out of Egypt to the Mount of Sinai, and here, after bringing them, giving them enough evidence that how much he loves them and that he is on their side and he expects them to obey, and he's saying that I am God, I am the one who rescued you, I am the one who brought you out of Egypt, remember, out of slavery. Now, because I am the one who did all of that, are you willing now to listen to what I have to say? Are you now willing to put yourself under my instructions? That is what is going on here. It is not the other way around. He first redeems and then he expects obedience. So he brings out redemption. He initiates the entire plan for us. And after showing his glory, his power, his majesty, now he's saying, will you put yourself under me? Will you commit yourself to me? Are you willing? Do you want to get into a marriage relationship with me? Because I'm the one who brought you out, out of Egypt and out of slavery and all of that. That's the picture God is painting here. So when we read the 10 words, we get a sort of thing that, okay, here are a few rules to maintain, or a few rules to follow, a few instructions to follow. But the heart behind it is completely different. What God intended behind what he was saying. Now, yes, there are instructions, but more in terms of life-giving instructions. That's principles. That is the goal behind all that is happening in the scene. So get the whole picture. Now, I want to make a final point, and we will talk about this maybe another time when we discuss more. Today we can't due to the lack of time. Understand that there were 2 tablets God gave. On one, there were 5, and the other, there was 5. Okay? On one tablet, there was 5 words, and the other, there were 5 words. Now, they are parallel to each other. The first word is parallel to the 6th. The second is parallel to the 7th. The third is parallel to the 8th, and the 4th to the 9th, and the 5th to the 10th. There's a connection like that. There is a relation between these 2. So when God says, I am the Lord your God, and then goes on to say, you shall not murder. Those 2 are connected. Why? I am the Lord your God. I am your creator, and you have been created in my image. You have no right to destroy another image. In other words, the ones who have been created in my image, you have no right to destroy their existence. Okay, so when he says, I'm your God, and you shall not murder, he's actually bringing the picture of identity. You have been created in my image. How can you go and kill others who have been created in my image? You just can't do that. There's a connection between those 2. And then there is the 2nd and 7th, you shall not have any other gods, versus you shall not commit adultery. When one worships a deity other than God, it is adultery, as you know in the scriptures. Okay, so God is loving us as a spouse, and he's saying, don't substitute anyone for me or anyone for your wife. There is no substitution. You shall only have me as your God, and there exactly how it will be in your marriage as well. There's that jealousy and intensity that is portrayed there. The relation between those 2. It is not just you shall not commit adultery. There is a background behind it, what God is trying to say. In other words, look at commandment 3rd and 8th. Don't take the Lord's name in vain versus don't steal. What is the connection? Because what he's trying to say is, don't misuse the reality of something unreal or something unreal. Meaning, a person may feel that stealing is only between him and the victim, but it's actually a crime against God, and because of that, his name will be put to shame. So what we end up doing is, we steal what is attached to a person, and we're taking that away. So he's saying, don't steal my name. Don't abuse my name. Don't take the Lord's name in vain is don't let his weightiness be lost. That's what it means actually there. 4th and 9th, keep the Sabbath versus false witnesses. Same thing. It is connected. You need to rest. You need to take a break, disengage. And by that, you will be a witness to God that you are different, you're unique, and you will testify to my name. And instead of being a false witness to my name, you will be a good witness to my name. 5th and 10th, honor your father and don't covet. This is a beautiful one, because if you read on this and what the rabbinic teachings are, there's a juxtaposition of jealousy and honoring of parents. Because parents teach us, ultimately give birth on earth to us. I mean, they are the ones who physically give birth to us, right? And their understanding was that if you curse if we ever curse our parents, it is really against God. And our existence is really because of our parents. And they had great honor for that. And they believe they should honor your parents because they are why we are here. So there's a sense of being content in that relationship. Whatever our parents have provided, being content in that, and don't look beyond or outside of that. When discontent happens and you start coveting and you become ungrateful for what God has given you. So he's really teaching to find contentment within the family setup, honoring your parents, what they have given you, and the limits which they have put for you, staying in gratitude and gratefulness so that we don't covet outside of it or desire more beyond that and feel like I deserve more and I've not got what I deserved. That's what leads to covetousness. Always this discontentment and ungratefulness, feeling like, oh, I should have got more. But God is teaching that be content where you grew and honor your parents and be grateful so that we don't become covetous in our nature. So there's a lot of connection between these two. I'm just briefly skimming through it. We can always look at it another point in detail as to what all of this really means. But I just want to paint a bigger picture today as to what was God really trying to say, and getting into a relationship with his people in terms of intimate, bonding, lovely covenant bond that is painting a picture of marriage in all of this. So don't view the 10 as, oh, keep instructions, but rather see the heart of God where he said that he brought us to himself, and that principles that lay behind these words and what it all means. So to me, it was very life-changing. When I look now, the whole Bible after this makes total sense. That, okay, that is exactly what God had in mind always. And he was not just there to give us rules and regulations, but he was here to get into a relationship with us and draw these boundaries to enhance that relationship and give us deeper principles rather than just do this or do that, but rather get the principles behind those do's and don'ts. So that is the heart of what is happening behind the Aseret Hadavarim, or the 10 words or Decalogue. Okay, so I just pray and hope that we would look into it deeper, study the scriptures deeper, and figure out that there's so much more. We can, after Jacoby's sessions finish, we can do another part where I'll do a conclusive section where you can all make sense. How is it all connected, and how is it all connected to Jesus? So we can do another session, but we'll wait for Jacoby's good 2-month session we're going to have together. So I'm really excited about that as well, to learn and to figure. So I hope that this has sort of brought some new light to our understanding of scripture and what the 10 words actually really mean. I know I rushed through it, okay, but I hope you got an overall picture. So thank you so much for patiently listening. If you have any thoughts to share or anything or questions, yeah, let's open it up for that. Love you all so much.